I've never heard this term manosphere before, which maybe shows that I'm like a step removed from, as a lesbian woman. Welcome to Sleeping Around, where we offer a peek behind the curtain of modern sex and relationship therapy and research, bringing you insights and conversations otherwise reserved for the therapy room. I'm your host, Alayna Joy, a Master's of Counseling Psychology student, content creator, and lifelong sex and relationship nerd. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Sleeping Around. Today's episode is for the guys. No, of course, it's an episode that everyone can benefit from listening to, but our guest today is a therapist who specializes in helping men improve their sex lives and helping men to learn to regulate emotions, remove sexual entitlement, hone their sexual consent and negotiation skills. And this conversation really blew my mind. I am not a man. I don't date men, but I learned a lot from this conversation. Today we hear from Dr. FitzMedrud. Like I said, he's a therapist and he specializes in relationship and sexual issues in the San Francisco Bay Area. He is the award-winning author of The Better Man, A Guide to Consent, Stronger Relationships, and Hotter Sex, with a PhD in clinical psychology. We'll learn a bit more about him in the episode as well, where we really talk about this quest to be a good man, quote unquote. What is a good man? How do you be a good man in today's world? What does that even mean? We talk about how to have confidence with women, how to deepen relationships. We ask the question, what is consent really? What does it look like? How do you do it well and in ways that's fun? It's one of my favorite conversations that I've had so far, and so I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But before we jump into the episode, I just want to thank those of you who have already rated or reviewed the show wherever it is that you get your podcasts. 5-star ratings, like on Spotify, for example, really help push the show out to other folks who might also enjoy it. So if you have listened to an episode and you like what you hear, take a second, give us a 5-star review, leave us a review on Apple. It really goes a long way in supporting this new project. So thank you. Okay, without further ado, on to the episode. Hello! For definitely the first time. This is organic and the first time we're trying this. I have a surprising number of straight, cis, male listeners in my audience in general, and I always ask them, like, why are you here? Because, I talk a lot about women, I talk a lot about queerness, I don't talk a lot about men. And they tend to say, I'm here to learn. I'm here because I learn about a new perspective or a conversation I maybe wouldn't have otherwise had. And while I think that's a wonderful and beautiful thing, I also thought, let's bring somebody on who specializes in working with men, with masculinities. I know you do a lot of work around consent and having great sex and all of that good stuff. And so that's who I want to be talking to.
Hey, if you've got a lot of cis, straight male listeners who are showing up to learn, those are my guys. Those are who I want to speak to. So I'm so glad to be here. Perfect.
We might have found a good match.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about your work and about what brought you to this work?
Sure. So I am myself bisexual and polyamorous, and I've gone through a number of developmental stages in my life. Kind of for a long time I identified as the straight ally, and then I was like, I probably have to acknowledge this other side of my experience. I kind of came out of the closet in early college, kind of just defaulted into a straight monogamous relationship and kind of let that side of my development fade, and later in life realized I needed to kind of re-acknowledge that. And I grew up Catholic with a high amount of sexual desire, which also required some developmental processes, partnering primarily with women, and I made some mistakes along the way. So when I was in college, when I was entering grad school, I was really interested in learning more about consent, learning more about sexuality, to fill in the educational gaps that I had over time. That eventually brought me into being a therapist, working a lot with men, and working with a lot of men around sexual issues, including in heterosexual relationships. And when the Me Too movement was getting going in late 2017, I was like, there's something here. There's something here. I need to be writing about this. What is it? And because I don't work with the kinds of predators that show up in the headlines, but I work with men, vast majority are horrified to learn that they've made a partner feel pressure, that they've made a partner feel violated or hurt. And they also don't know what to do with desired differences in relationship. They want love. They want to express desire. And I was like, what is the in here? So in early 2018, there was a particular story that was closer to what I would see in my office. And I was like, let me write about that. And I wrote 1, 2, 4, eventually 8 blog entries. And I was like, oh no, this is a book. I wish I was writing about something so much easier.
Oops, I'm writing a book.
Yeah. And this is going to be really hard because I made mistakes myself. I knew pretty early on in the process, like, yes, I need to write good evidence-based practices, the kind of things that I would use in my psychotherapy office. And I can't do this from behind the PhD as a shield. I need to do this as an authentic human. I need to do it with vulnerability, and I need to acknowledge my mistakes in the process. And so about half of the 5 years it took me to write the book and get it out to the world were writing and editing and figuring out the publishing process. And the other half were a lot of deep internal work, figuring out how to be on a public stage in a vulnerable way.
Okay, you just touched on so many things that I want to ask you more questions about.
Yeah.
Let's start with, so you mentioned making mistakes, wanting to show up in an authentic human to human kind of way. And you also talked about unlearning and processing various things, whether that was your sexuality or non-monogamy. How do you begin? Where does somebody start with an unlearning process?
Unfortunately, a lot of men, especially cis het men, are only brought to investigating some of these things when something is breaking in our lives. We lost a relationship. We entered a divorce process. We're losing our relationship with our children. We have hurt a partner significantly. And unfortunately, it seems common that we're only brought to our knees around questioning the things that we've been taught around our sexuality, around patriarchy, around the roles that we've been assigned, when it totally breaks down for us, and when we've lost something significant or hurt somebody that we love very deeply. For a lot of other sexual outsiders, whether that's orientation or gender or love or relationship style or kink, the experience of like, hey, something very obvious here doesn't fit inside the box, invites that questioning earlier. But I think it is very common that it's something breaking first.
And so if somebody's listening to this, and whether they're thinking, you've just described my situation, I'm having this difficulty in my relationship, or I've lost something, or XYZ has broken, or they're listening and going, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to only address these things when it's too late. What do you say to those listeners?
Yeah, so there is a smaller number of men, including cishet men, who begin exploring this work, and it's not because something's broken, it's because they've gotten into the proactive process, and it's because they recognize the risks around them, the risks to men, the risks to your partners, the risks to your friendships, community relationships, and relationships with friends and children. That's what's at stake here. If you have, tipped an ear to the manosphere and you've heard about the epidemic of loneliness among men, or if you've heard about how hard it is to be a man these days, and you resonate with some of that, then you know that there is some risks to us in an unexamined patriarchy. That's true. That's why the manosphere seems to appeal to so many men, because it speaks to a lot of men's pain. That pain is real. And you don't have to be in that much pain. You don't have to work that hard. You don't have to be this exhausted. There is a developmental process that is hard work, and you can get through it, and it will be so much easier for you on the other side because you won't be trying to read people's minds. You won't be trying to live up to a standard that isn't authentic. And when you let that armor down, you will be at so much greater ease. And you'll have so much more community, companionship, and support on the other side. You will be absolutely the opposite of alone over there.
Wow. And I've never heard this term manosphere before, which maybe shows that I'm like a step removed from, as a lesbian woman, like I'm a sidestep away from the manosphere.
So this is the term that's used to aggregate the 4 kind of entry doors for men into the radicalization of, more overt racism, misogyny, and things like that. So it's incels, men going their own way, men's rights activists, and pickup artists. And together, those influencers can be referred to as the manosphere. And there's some really concrete research evidence that it really is a slippery slope stepping stone into white nationalism, violent racism, not just conservative politics, but like fascist politics, and significant isolation. All of those kinds of influencers are grifters looking for your money, trying to teach you tools that will tell you they are using to improve your relationships, and they're lying, and also you will feel less effective coming out of it.
Yeah.
And when you feel less effective, they will get you to blame feminism, others, queer folk, trans people, some other person to direct your anger to, and that anger then becomes the pathway to radicalization.
And you're probably speaking to another thread here, which is that anger is possibly the only quote unquote, big air quotes, acceptable emotion for men to feel, or like that's what you're taught, right? As far as I understand it.
The other one that I like to emphasize is you're also allowed to be lustful. At least in the appropriate spaces where men have divided their lustful nature from their good man nature. So that's a part of the man training, is that to be a good man, you can't be one of those hornballs. But of course you are one of those hornballs. You just have to hide it in the appropriate ways. And so that means making your masturbation, your pornography viewing, your visits to sex workers, if you do that, or just your kinky desires. You have to hide that from your partner.
That almost sounds like the parallel to the kind of the women's virgin whore dichotomy.
Right. So again, to me, that's the origin of the Madonna whore split. The patriarchy split itself this idea that good men do good things in the world and look like good men. This is why, so much of like the Christian right has this prescription for what, masculine, family-oriented men are supposed to look like. And then can we get through a single week without a major scandal for a major Christian leader who's doing some kind of sexual thing on the side, or a congressman or something like that? So when we divide our sexuality and we say desire is bad, and you're only supposed to desire the good things, then we project that onto women, and we project that onto sexual minorities or sex workers or whatever else it is. We divide ourselves, and then we divide the world.
Wow. Okay, I'm taking in what you just said.
So this all comes directly from Bell Hooks too, right? She says that the first demand that patriarchy demands of men is not that they hurt others, but that they cut themselves off from their own feelings. And desire is one of those.
And so would this also be tied to the idea that for some men, the only way that they can access intimacy or access kind of closeness is through sex? And so there's this pursuit of physical intimacy, perhaps as a substitute or as like a gateway into other forms of intimacy?
Absolutely. There's so many other things that also contribute to it, right? Internalized homophobia, even for cis straight men. We are afraid of being perceived as vulnerable, emotional, feminine, or gay because we know we have witnessed, maybe we have even enacted violence against men who don't fall into that hypermasculine cishet norm. And so we are terrified in our nervous system that if we show vulnerable human connection, that we will be perceived as gay and become the victim of violence or social ostracizing. And that means that we eliminate all human connection that isn't romantic and sexual connection. And that means that we come to our connections often starving for vulnerability, starving for human connection. So we've got all of the scarcity, all of the divided strength of our desire. And then we show up in an intimate moment with no idea how to have these experiences because we haven't had them very often. We haven't learned how to regulate it. And then it all ends up feeling out of control for us and our partners.
The stakes are high.
The stakes are high.
The stakes are high.
And what I hope men hear is, even if the more extreme challenges of this are not a part of your experience, it's not your fault that this has happened to you. This is our wound under patriarchy. And when we tune our ears to the right people who are talking about how to move forward with women, with feminism, with racial justice movements, with queer liberation, then we can be a part of the community, and us attending to our wounds in patriarchy will not be a problem.
You're describing the antidote, right? It's so interesting that the antidote seems to be the exact thing that you're taught to be afraid of, that you're taught is so dangerous.
Well, and that's why it's so hard, right? That's why we often only come to it when we're breaking. Because if we're afraid of, after the fishing trip with our buddies on the drive back in a moment where we're talking about, gosh, I'm actually kind of afraid of going back home. My wife's been going through some mental health issues, and sometimes I don't know how to parent well. And we're afraid that dude's going to be like, what are you going to cry? Like, that fear is real because we've experienced it. And also what we need is exactly to open up. And the other men around us are probably also desperate to open up. And that's why a part of what I have in my book is some scripts for men for how to begin opening up with other men and pushing past that initial, I really might cry. Like, what are you saying? Like, don't you have trouble in your life? Like, actually, I know you have some difficulty in your relationship. Like, let's talk about it. And once other men realize, hey, this is a safe space, we're not going to do that thing where we punch each other in the arm instead of open up about our feelings. We're strong enough to create those spaces with each other, and it's really powerful for us when we do.
You're giving me goosebumps. I'm just imagining, even I'm thinking about, my dad and his buddies on a fishing trip, and, the idea, it's so interesting. I remember a couple years ago, I was at, a kind of house party gathering with a bunch of my parents' friends, and, I'm from a small conservative town in, middle of nowhere, Manitoba, Canada. And so these kind of dinner parties, it just immediately they segregate into the men and the women, right? The women go in the kitchen and chat, and
the men would go downstairs and watch football.
And then the men, exactly, they're either outside drinking a beer, smoking a cigar, they're watching the game, something like that. And, usually I would just go with the women, and we chat, and everybody's catching up about their lives and talking about their kids and checking in. How are you doing? You had this thing last week. How was it? And I was curious, and I went outside, and I sat down with the men for a little bit just to see. I was getting side eyes, first of all. They were like, what are you doing here? Which was kind of entertaining. But then it was fascinating. They just talked about sports scores. They talked about, exactly, fishing or poker or some sort of, there was not a single update about any of their lives or their day-to-day or the way that the world was feeling. None of that.
Yeah, this is literally, you were stealing an anecdote that I tell in various stories. So I grew up in Minnesota, so I think of myself as half Canadian.
Yep.
And I was 18, 19. I came back from living abroad for a little bit, and I was hanging out with the men downstairs, and they were playing football, and I was like, I'm going to go upstairs. I like cooking. I'm going to go, and among the women, I learned about what's going on with the grandparents. I'm learning about what's going on in the relationships, what's going on developmentally for the kids in school and jobs. And I even learned about the men and what's going on in their mental health pictures.
Yes.
But downstairs at the football screen, I never learned about any of that. And for me, this kind of back and forth lens is a part of my bi-identity, of kind of seeing both experiences and trying to help that translation across.
Completely. You mentioned in your book, which, by the way, is called The Better Man, A Guide to Consent, Stronger Relationships, and Hotter Sex. It'll be linked in the show notes for anybody who's interested. You mentioned some kind of starters, some conversation starters, some prompts. Would you be able to share maybe one
Sure.
with the audience?
Yeah, so I'm a really big fan of just taking all of the internal fears that you have, like sit down, write out on a sheet of paper, like, what is your fear about what's going to happen? I'm afraid that I'm going to be teased. I'm afraid that if I try to open this up with my buddy, that he's going to say, what are you going to cry? Hey, we're men, we don't talk about that, or something like that. Write it out. And then make that your prelude. Hey, I know that as men we don't usually talk about things like this. Usually we keep it on the poker and the fishing and the football. Mm-hmm. But I've got some stuff going on in my life, and you're my closest male friend. And I think I could really use talking about it if we could get real with each other. And I'd love to be here for you too. You're already naming the fear, right? You're already naming the masculine script that the two of you are already operating on. And you're being clear. Hey, I'm not just opening up. I'm offering this also to you. And I'm afraid that you're going to do all the things that are already in the script. So even if your buddy then goes back into that script, you know that you've tried really hard. What I tell most men is push past the first rebuttal. So you might get that, I don't know how to really talk about feelings. Like, this stuff is just so overwhelming. I don't know. Try again. Hey, I think it's really important. I think this is why men have a 4 times higher suicide rate. Hey, I think this is why men have higher levels of substance use, because we just drown our feelings in substances. Let's solve that together. Let's talk about these things. What do you say? If you get another rebuttal, maybe you need to try a different friend.
Yeah.
But I haven't met too many men who go through that naming the fear and then the rebuttal, and their buddy still tries to hold on to the manuscript. Most of us are just bubbles waiting to burst for the opportunity where it's safe enough. We've been holding it in for so long, and it hurts.
No kidding. And I imagine as a therapist as well, you work with both individuals and couples, correct?
I do.
So I would also imagine that you see a lot of that bubble bursting in the therapy room, where someone's saying to you, I've never said that before out loud. I've never been listened to in this way.
Yeah.
And to imagine friendships being able to offer that to each other is, like, I could cry. That's just such a...
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. So in your couples work or in your therapy work with men, what are some of the most common issues or things that you see?
So I really think of this process of opening up as a multi-stage developmental process. So that's why I start with naming the wounds and the pain, right? This is hard. There's a reason for it. It's not your fault. You haven't been taught some of this stuff. And then we need to gather information and learn, like men have emotions. Men are actually not unemotional. We've been taught how to wrap our emotions and our relationship needs in opinions about what's right. But it actually ends up being, when you get down to it, actually, this is just what I need.
Oh, could you give us an example of that to illustrate?
Sure. So a man might say to his partner, you never touch me. And that's not really a relationship. You shouldn't do that. And he asserts it from a position of like right, correct opinion that is asserted as if it's just true. But what he's really saying is, I'm hurting without touch. I really need touch. And touch is a really important part of our relationship for me. And I would like to ask that from you, but I don't know how. So I tell you, you ought to do it.
Yeah. Right.
And as we get more used to the fact that we do have relationship needs, our hearts do feel for our partners, for our children, for our community members. We have that lump in our throat that stops us from saying it, but the feeling was there.
Yeah.
Then we begin figuring out, how can we begin expressing it? That means building the vocabulary, building that connection between, what is that feeling in my chest right now? I don't know. Is that indigestion? Is that just muscle tension? And eventually learning like, oh, that's heartache. That's pain. That's grief. That's a desire for connection that I haven't known how to express, that I've been tamping down. And eventually we build the vocabulary. Now we've got the skills. Then we get skillful at actually connecting the words and saying it. Then we get comfortable hearing the pushback and the feedback about how to do it better. And then we become full partners in our relationships. In other words, our deficit is not in ourselves. It's not in our manhood. It's a skill. We can train it. We can build the muscle. And it's uncomfortable, and sometimes our muscles are going to be sore, but we can do it and we can get better at it.
There you go. Now you've put it into, what was the term you used earlier? The manscape? That's not the word.
The manosphere? Put it into manosphere language?
Yeah, the manosphere. We can take this thing to the gym. We can work that muscle. We can get our max reps, or what are they, a PB? Personal.
Yeah. Yeah, personal best, beat your personal best.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I mean, any therapy, you could say the same thing, but what you're describing, that sounds like a lot of work. It doesn't sound easy.
It isn't. And for a lot of men, especially, we're afraid of kind of opening up the hurt locker, opening up the traumas, naming the pain or the grief that we've been stuffing down for a long time. And there is a flood. Like, if I was an influencer trying to peddle, my $2,000 course, I wouldn't tell you how hard it's going to be.
Yeah.
It is going to be a hard pill to swallow. It's going to be experiencing pain. And sometimes I'll use this analogy. It's a lot like how your leg hurts if it was asleep and you start waking it up. If there's tingles and pains and spikes, as you come into your emotional awareness, you will suddenly have feelings that feel intense and like they're going to wash you away. They won't. And once you're fully embodied in your emotions, it will not hurt that way anymore. You'll be able to tolerate the grief and the pain of everyday life and intense major life moments like your mother or your father passing away with more ease and fluidity and connection. And you'll be stronger for it, actually, because you won't be brittle anymore.
I almost relate that a sort of parallel way to like the discovery of queerness and that kind of experience. I only realized that I was gay when I was 28, and I had been in a long-term relationship with a man, so it was a big change and a bit of a shock, and I resonate with that description of kind of the flood and the hurt locker and this kind of whole new world of experiences emotionally that I maybe was unprepared for and also didn't know was there under the surface.
Yeah.
But then once that began, right, and once we kind of came through the first the first wave, life is a much fuller place, having access to this completely new level of emotion that I think I was numb to before.
Yeah, and just because you were numb to it doesn't mean that it wasn't there, and doesn't mean that what was happening day in, day out wasn't affecting you. And I think it's a good analogy, and it actually goes to one of the things that discovery that you went through is realizing there's more than one way I can be. And what a lot of men have been struggling under is the patriarchal notion that there's one right way to be a man, and that is strong, unemotional, successful, and skillful in all things. And the reality is that two-dimensional caricature is not accurate for even the most hyper-masculine cis-het man. You will age, and at some point in your life you will lose muscle strength. You will age and your relationship with your erections will change. You will age and people close to you will die. It doesn't matter how strong, skillful, how much you love cars, how much you work out in the gym. You will face moments where your love brings you to your knees. That doesn't make you less of a man. And so we have to realize that there are many different ways to be a man. That includes how each of us shows up as a man differently in different life circumstances.
Would you describe kind of this caricature of a man? Would you equate that with the kind of common zeitgeist of toxic masculinity? Or where would you say toxic masculinity fits into all of this?
Yeah, so the term toxic masculinity came from men doing men's work. We identified that toxic masculinity was toxic for us. And even though there's a lot of pushback about that term right now as it gets used about the community of men, I think it's important to remember that we created this term to talk about how two-dimensional masculinity is hurting us. So sometimes I'll talk about it as destructive masculinity or hyper-masculinity or constrictive masculinity. Mark Green talks about the man box. The quick summary, though, is just this idea that there's one way to be, and that when you get feedback that isn't working, you double down on it. Ooh. And the feedback that we get from our community that is toxic to them, that is damaging to them, is because if we can't receive feedback about what isn't skillful in maintaining relationship, then we will keep hurting the people around us. It's one thing to make a mistake, but when we get feedback and double down on it, then we're really being obstinate and hurtful, not just we accidentally hurt the person near us.
How would you tie that? Because we've only just touched on kind of your consent work and thoughts around consent, but it feels relevant to the feedback doubling down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So look, manosphere influencers will sell men a $2,000 package on how to please a woman. And whether he's selling you like spell out the ABCs with your tongue.
Yeah, women will love it.
Oh God, it infuriates me so much because women are not a monolith. Because every lover is different, because every man is different. And so your way to be an attractive lover is not to try to be a clone of some other guy.
The piece about being the best lover, being an incredible partner, is not to be the same as some other man, or not to emulate somebody else. I polled my audience for questions before this episode.
Oh, great.
And one of the most common things that was asked was tips on confidence. How do I be more confident? How do I act with confidence? How do I approach women with confidence? There were so many questions about confidence. And so I would love like a thought or two on so now we know you're not supposed to just emulate some other man who sold you his $2,000 course on negging. So then what?
So the real path to confidence is to realize that you are a flawed human being and that's okay.
Ooh, okay. Uh-huh.
Everybody else is also a real flawed human being. Anybody that says otherwise is selling you something and it will not be effective.
Right.
But like, you didn't come out of the womb knowing how to fix a car. You didn't come out of the womb knowing how to catch a football. Even if you're the most hyper-masculine man, you didn't come out of the womb knowing how to throw a jab perfectly. So how could you come out of the womb as a masculine man knowing how to please a partner? How could you know how to communicate skillfully? And then when you get into the fact that every person is different and every partner is different, you need to realize that every person is an entirely new learning curve. How do I show up in this relationship? So when you get feedback, that doesn't work for me. Okay, right? You can double down on the notion that it should, and now all of my lovers are wrong. Or I can take feedback. Okay, this lover needs that. This lover needs this lover needs that. When you can take that feedback, you're confident. And you'll also find some people that you don't match with. You're not everybody's cup of tea. You can't be an Olympic athlete in every single different sport. The body that's required to be a weightlifting Olympic athlete is not the body that's required to be a marathon runner. They look very different, but they both get gold.
Yeah. The key to confidence is the ability to take feedback.
Yeah.
That feels true in so many arenas.
Yeah. And then at some point, maybe you're getting so much feedback that you tap out and you get overwhelmed by it. That's normal, right? If you go to a class and you get a flood of information, you might need to break that down into smaller pieces to really become skillful. Or you might be learning something too far above where you are and you need to back up and learn, more fundamentals. That's about regulating your experience in the learning process. It's not about the feedback is bad.
Okay, thank you for that. Now,
Yeah.
the consent piece.
Yeah, so the consent piece is this process of coming in knowing that you don't know. I like to frame consent as a 3-part process. It's the before, and we talk about and prepare for what we're agreeing to. It's the during and the monitoring of the consent in process, which includes everything from the eye contact to how you doing, to brief pauses in between to say, like, is this still good? And then it's the after and the follow-up. And even in a hookup, there's a moment of like, how was that? Are we doing okay? Is everything all right in there? Did I deliver on the consent the way that I intended to? And the feedback in that process is really, really valuable.
Kind of like an aftercare piece.
Like an aftercare piece, yeah. I'm a big fan of taking wisdom like aftercare from the kink community and bringing it into vanilla space, because it's just a lot of wisdom to be had there.
Mm-hmm. We're bringing sexual wisdom from the lesbian queer community. We're bringing sexual freedom and expression from the gay men. We're bringing aftercare from kink.
We're reclaiming high levels of desire from men.
Yes.
And we're saying that's all okay for everybody. And we're all better for all of that cross-pollination. In my book, I really build up, 80% of the book is building up to all of the foundational skills that help a consent conversation go smoothly, so that by the time you get to a consent conversation, you already have lots of other human connection. You already have people in your corner that you can turn to for emotional support. So you know already, if this date doesn't turn out, you're going to be able to call up your buddy Josh and be like, hey, it didn't work out really well. She doesn't seem that into me. So now that you know you can handle the declined offer, and now that you know that you have a wealth of other human connections that are affirming that you're a person of value, now you're not coming in with scarcity. Now you're coming in and you're making an offer. Hey, I would love to offer you pleasure this way. And you're making requests. I would love to receive pleasure this way. How does that sound to you? And because you are resilient, because you know you're not the best lover for everyone, but you know you might be a good enough lover with the right people, then you can begin making those offers with resilience. Oh, not A, let's try B. Oh, you're into that? I don't know. I've never tried that before. We could try. And you have curiosity about what's being offered and requested back. Now consent is for you and to protect your heart, to protect you from an unwanted pregnancy, to protect you from STIs. Now it's a mutual process. Now we're not just trying to go for the high bar of consent towards mutual pleasure and satisfaction, and we're almost certainly going in that process to go over the low bar consent of, preventing sexual assault or worse.
Yep, you're offering consent as a process toward the best experience you could possibly have in collaboration with the other person, rather than consent as, like you said, well, I don't want to be accused of something I didn't do.
Right, right. And all of that comes on top of being able to regulate our own emotions, including sadness, disappointment, desire, frustration. When we can take that responsibility for our emotions, then the consent conversations can go wherever they need to authentically. And we regulate those emotions, and we can stay in relationship and nothing gets ruined by our partner telling us no.
Well, and I'm glad you named frustration and disappointment.
Yeah.
Because being able to regulate our own emotions, being able to confidently have these consent kind of ongoing conversations, it doesn't mean that we'll never feel disappointed. It doesn't mean we'll never feel frustrated, or that now magically our needs are always going to be met.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that experiencing those things is somehow wrong or lesser or dangerous.
Yeah. The first noble truth of Buddhism is life is suffering. Right?
Yeah.
We're not going to skillful our way out of that. It's still going to be difficult at times.
When I was doing some research for this episode, I heard you say something. I got a quote from you that I think fits in here really well. You said, when we receive a no, that doesn't mean a no to us, a no to everything, a no to the next time. A no means no in this situation to the way you asked.
So the context for that conversation is kind of long-term relationships.
Yes.
And it's a part of my dialogue with men about the thing that we're often very afraid of. We talk about rejection. And, well, she keeps rejecting me, or my partner keeps rejecting me. And so often in my office, when I hear this in a long-term relationship, I'm like, your partner's been here for 20 years. Your partner continues having sex with you sometimes. Yes, it may be less frequent than you would like. But what exactly do you mean when you say rejection? And what's happening is we're describing a feeling. And we're using rejected as the past tense verb. We're ascribing to the person that they rejected me. But actually, they just said no, thank you. And a lot of what we can do, especially in long-term relationships, is begin to realize that a part of the reason that we receive as many declined offers as we do is that we're not offering our partners pleasure, because when our partners anticipate pleasure, that creates desire.
Yes,
right. And if they haven't experienced pleasure, then they won't anticipate desire. So we need to really tune in what creates desire for our partner. Is that the same as us, or is it different? It's okay for it to be different. In every couple I've ever worked with, there are some differences. And then, are we asking in the way that they want to be asked? Is my partner a slow warm-up kind of person, context-dependent over time, plus wanting to make sure that all the doors are locked and the house is quiet and the stress is put away before they can even think about being open to that? And then, when have I asked, right? If we're out doing errands and there are 3 different stores to stop at and we're going through the list, and I turn to my partner and I say, hey, do you want to have sex tonight? Like, the odds are that that's not the mindset, the emotions, or the body that they're in at that moment. So we can become more skillful. And none of that means no doesn't mean no. No means no. But get clearer about the difference between feeling rejected by that no and whether it really is rejection.
Right, the difference between it being a no to something that you've offered or the way that you've asked versus some sort of value, worthiness, judgment on you as a person or as a partner.
Yeah, exactly.
I also heard you use a metaphor of a house, building a foundation.
Yeah. So this comes from Everyday Feminism,
Okay.
comic, and it was one of my favorite metaphors for consent, which is that when you open a construction zone, you put on the hard hat and the safety vest, and you use all the best OSHA standards to protect the safety of all the workers who are building the house. But if you're in a long-term relationship, the foundation and the structure of that house are pretty familiar, and you usually couples develop a repertoire of behaviors and ways that they move from one part of that decision process to another, which may or may not include explicit consent every time. And that's fine. But if you're looking to make a new addition and you want to try a new sexual position or practice or kink or something like that, you're engaging in construction again. You better put the hard hat, the safety vest, and all of the most explicit consent practices back into practice.
That's a really good visual, and it's again, it feels manosphere. We're doing construction.
Yeah.
We're building a house.
Yeah. And I love that it came from everyday feminism, right?
True. Yeah, right.
Using that metaphor, yeah.
How about for men who, obviously the consent piece is important for all of these experiences, but I also had some men reaching out talking about shame and experiencing sexual shame as a man, and how that might be a uniquely difficult experience.
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to that division that gets told to us, that there are good men and there are bad men. And bad men have bad kinds of desire. And that's one of the places where this dialogue gets started. In addition to some of the ways that men's sexuality gets shamed, men are pigs, men are dogs, men only want one thing. And a lot of that message gets in. And if you're a man with a conscience and a community orientation, you want to be a good man. And so you try to fit your sexuality into the boxes that you think that it's supposed to fit into. And that can end up creating these cordoned off parts of your sexuality that you have shame about. Because we don't choose what turns us on. And some of this shame, I think we're learning to figure out how to talk about as we've claimed gay men's sexuality, and we celebrate it, whether it's at Pride or on Grindr or whatever else. It's like gay men have a way of showing up as sexual beings, and when cis straight men look at gay men and say, hey, there's something about male sexuality there. It's boisterous, it's creative, it might include leather or kink elements or things like that. We can begin to see that it's normal for men and humans to have a variety of sexual manifestations. Then, especially for heterosexual men or men who are dating women, we can get into this other thing where if women have been, the women that we're dating have been experiencing and learning about sexuality in their own siloed media experiences or their own cultural myths of like romanticized sexuality, there might be a really big divide between the two mental models of what we're bringing into the bedroom.
Right.
If your girlfriend is watching Bridgerton and experiencing the slow burn, and your mental model for sexuality is porn, no lube, no consent conversations. The first time digits come in contact with the orifice, they penetrate it.
She's stuck.
Yeah, there is a massive discrepancy between these two things.
Yeah.
And we can become very scared about sharing what turns us on because we might get that initial, crinkled nose, furrowed brow reaction of like, oh, that's dirty, that's not feminist, that feels shaming, that feels problematic to your partner. And now we feel even more nervous about bringing that in. And so we leave it on the sidelines. I've talked with a lot of men who have said, well, I had this kink and I tried talking with you about it once 15 years ago.
Okay.
And she's like, well, what happened? And, well, you said you weren't really interested in that. And then that's the end of the conversation entirely. Because he's protecting his vulnerable heart and his vulnerable attraction and desire. But that's also the source, maybe, of creativity, eroticism, vibrancy, spice in a long-term relationship over time. And so we need, as men, to understand that our desire is a gift that we bring to our relationships. We need to start by not shaming that desire with each other. And we need to begin developing non-pressuring scripts for how to talk with our partners about that desire in ways that open the conversation and stay resilient to difference without shying away from the real nature of our sexuality.
There is, unsurprisingly, so much nuance to the conversation around male desire and men and sex, and because it's almost, on the one hand, we're talking about this destructive masculinity and how that kind of the lustful sex being the only road to intimacy, holding that, and then also saying, but your desire's not shameful, but your the things that turn you on aren't shameful, you can bring those to your partner. I don't want to use the word confusing, but it's like, if you're a man listening to this and you're going, hold on,
right.
What do I do with all this?
And then if you're a man partnered with a person who has been traumatized in their sexuality by other men, which many of them have been, partners of any gender might have been traumatized by men in their sexuality. Now you're in the body of the abuser trying to bring vibrant sexuality into a relationship without triggering your partner's trauma. And so it is a nuanced and delicate conversation to figure out how to do this skillfully without shaming myself, without triggering my partner, without invalidating the things that don't work for them, but while celebrating and claiming the things that do work for me. And it's learnable. It is a skill set. I have a blueprint. Yes. Don't get discouraged. That's why I wrote the book. Yeah, exactly. And
there's literally a book.
Yeah. And, I'm just one voice, right? I think that bell hooks, The Will to Change, should be must reading for every man, because it's such a beautiful claiming of men and our vulnerable hearts. I do take issue at a couple of points, whether it's in All About Love or The Will to Change, with some of her ways of talking about pornography and gay sex, because I think she wrote at a different time and at a different place in sex-positive movements in our culture. And it's such a great starting place.
Well, and that kind of touches back to another nuanced piece, which was when you were mentioning kind of pride and how gay men have tapped into this sort of acceptable celebration of sexuality. Yeah. And again, you pair that with this kind of feminization of gay men and queer sex, and this internalized homophobia or blatant homophobia around disgust response you get from some men. And again, it's these two seemingly incompatible ideas which both hold so much importance to look at.
Yeah, I think it's so important when we're talking about men's work that we talk about diversity within men's work.
Ooh, yeah.
When even the cis and heterosexual men in a men's work community claim and assure the safety of the gay men, the kinky men, and the trans men, they will feel safer.
Right.
Because there is inherent diversity in men around sexuality. There's inherent diversity among men around racial identity, around income levels and class levels. And when we make it safe for everybody, then the wisdom of our collective diversity comes out. And we start to recognize, trans men have a lot to teach cis men about the fact that you can be a good lover without a hard penis.
Yes.
And we get to decentralize that idea that our manhood and our value as a lover is fixated on what happens in the hydraulics below the belt. That doesn't mean that we can't still have erections and orgasms, and it doesn't mean that we can't still please our partner with how we bring that into the bedroom. But it means it's not the only source of our value.
Absolutely. And that touches into another one of the audience questions that I got, which in a few minutes here, we're going to end the regular episode and go into the extended Patreon version, where one of the questions that, again, I got repeatedly, and these are things I wouldn't have thought of as a cis woman thinking about men's sexuality. It was asking about how to kind of decentralize the erection, decentralize the penis as the pleasure center, and how we can do that. But I'm gonna hold you to jump over into that version. One last question I want to ask you before we wrap up is, as this show is about bringing therapeutic and academic insights to listeners, in your work with men and masculinities and everything we've talked about, what's one thing that you wish everybody knew?
That men are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Even if we seem physically or emotionally tough, we need connection. And what people say about us matters.
That's so, I'm so appreciative of you being here and sharing all of this knowledge and information, and this has been such a wonderful conversation. If you have a few more minutes, I'd love to have you on the extended version.
Let's do it.
But for those of you listening, his work will be linked in the show notes. It'll be linked in the description. Is there anything specific that you want to plug?
Just the book. I mean, this is the work that I've put out for you to try to synthesize the best of my therapeutic practice for a larger audience. And if you are a partner to a man, the feedback that I'm getting is that this is the book that the partner wants the man to read, that speaks to him and will help him with his process so that you don't have to do all the work.
I believe you're making me want to read the book. I am fully a woman in relationship with a woman, and I'm like, I think I need to read this book.
I would love notes from that side of the diversity spectrum.
Okay,
I would really value it.
I'll have to grab a coffee after this. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you want to hear the extended version, we're going to answer a couple of audience questions over on Patreon. But that's it. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. You can also access all of our extended cut episodes with bonus content from every single guest over on Patreon at patreon.com/AlaynaJoy. That's patreon.com/ALAYNAJoy. And be sure to follow us on Instagram at sleepingaroundpod for updates, teasers, episode discussions, and more. This episode was produced by Alayna Joy and Danae Fender and edited by Lucian Brinkley. See you next time, back here on the couch.